Me and Sapphire are out walking on the Liberty Trail. It's kind of a linear bike footpath right down the road from the house, and just trying to get the steps in today. And it's Father's Day of 2020. It's going to be a video broken up into a lot of different segments, and it may turn out to be a very long video, but I want to give you some information, some recollection, some memories from my life in regard to my dad, Norman Oberg. I think it's fitting to start on a Father's Day for something like this to think about and reminisce about, and maybe give some perspective to you all, or just some insight as to who you all and a little bit of the family that you've grown up from. I don't know how this video is going to roll. I thought, well, I'll break it into bits of nostalgia, good memories, and some of the bad memories as well, because you need to have a bit of a taste of all. I will say this in this first segment, that my dad's birthday was on Flag Day. He was born in 1938, and so that would have made him 82 years old today. He died several years ago, and I was trying to remember exactly the year, and I'm sure if I had written all the notes down that I was kind of thinking I wanted to do for this, I would know exactly. But I'm thinking about 8. I do not think Nick was married yet, but he went with me and Dave, Uncle Dave, my brother Dave, to Phoenix, Arizona to deal with his effects, and that maybe will be one of my stories as we put all these segments together. My dad was born in Chicago, and I think he was born on the north side. He was born to Harry and Evelyn. And now, I didn't know Harry very well. Harry died sometime in the 60s. I was born in 1961, but I do think I have a picture with him somewhere in all the pictures that I've got that are just a mess. But that'd be a cool picture to pull out. So I didn't know him very well. Probably didn't spend a whole lot of time with him. And if I did, I don't remember much of that at all. Did spend a lot of time with my grandmother, Evelyn. She lived in the suburbs of Chicago, a couple different places. But the main place that I do remember was near Napersville. And I've got great memories of going to my grandmother's house. But by the time I remembered that, they had been divorced, and I do not know the details of that. And since my dad has passed away, probably never know the details about that unless my mom knows. Anyway, that's the first segment. We'll cut it there and we'll see where we go from there. Bye. The more I think about this, the more this is just going to be kind of choppy, so there's no logical run to this, because this is probably going to last throughout this next week, me doing little video snippets. It may even last longer, but if I was to describe my dad, boy, there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad in there. And well, let's go with some of the good, and it could be bad too. He was pretty fastidious about his hair. That is one thing that I remember very much about him, because he was always brushing his hair back. He had this little flat kind of comb brush thing that fit on his finger, and it's funny the things that you remember about people and what sticks out in your mind, but that is like a big time memory, because if I was going to the bathroom or whatever, or that comb, that little brush, whatever that thing was called, was always there. And he took care of his hair a lot. Now, I don't necessarily remember him putting any kind of treatment on or anything, but he was always putting that hair in place, brushing it back. And I think to the day he died, he did the same thing, because in seeing pictures of him, always had his hair brushed back, never let it fall into his face or eyes. Now, I do remember seeing, I've got pictures of him where he's brushed his hair back kind of in that, the 50s style. It's kind of a greasy look, and it was definitely product then. And I think he used a little bit of product to kind of keep that pasted down, so to speak. But he brushed his hair back, and that's just kind of the style that he had. And it's just kind of funny, the things that you think about and remember. There's a little story for you. Bye. If my dad was anything, he was pretty loyal. Now, my parents eventually divorced, but there was a lot that he did to try to keep that from happening. Now, there's a lot that he did where he made that almost not potentiality, but inevitability, because he just did a lot of bad things. Anyway, he was a loyal person, though, and he was loyal to my mom. I don't know if he ever cheated on her, and I'm trying to keep this PG. I don't recall any of that kind of thing. It seemed like they were connected pretty well in their marriage until the end. And the end kind of drug on for a few years, so it's not like it happened overnight. And I'll talk about some of that stuff too, the things that brought the end of that marriage. And that's part of the bad stuff. But he was loyal. He had a good friend in the music business. His name was Tony, for some reason. I'm having a hard time remembering his last name, but he was Italian, so it was an Italian last name. And my dad was loyal to him to a fault. There was promises that Tony made to my dad, and I don't know all of how that all worked out and what that all looked like, because I was a kid. I was a young teenager, and I cared more about music, listening to the music on the radio, and playing baseball, specifically a game called Strikeout, with a rubber ball and a bat. And so in trying to think about what all that looked like as far as his loyalty to Tony and the promises that were made, a lot of things that happened in their relationship were behind closed doors. So to think about what that all looked like as far as their adult relationship and the promises that Tony made, particularly in regard to, Tony was really involved in the music business, knew a lot of people, and this was when we were in Atlanta that I was probably more cognizant of this, but I believe they met in Chicago, so it's part of a relationship that goes back a little bit farther into the early 70s that I don't know all about, because some of that my parents kept hidden to me for a variety of reasons, and I'll probably elaborate on those later. But the promises, I don't know if they necessarily kept my dad loyal, but he was a loyal person anyway, and didn't have a ton of friends that I recall, people that hung out and came out to the house and stuff like that. We did a lot more of that kind of thing with family, and that will be a separate segment as well. But like I said, he was loyal. To break that down any more than that, I do not know, because I don't know all of what those promises were made, and whether it kind of stringed my dad along, particularly in the mid-70s. So there's that. Oh, to go back so I don't have to redo it. You know, I talked about my dad being fastidious in regard to his hair. I think I want to define that a little bit more. He was particular. He was careful. He was, what's the word? Intentional. It was something he did all the time with his hair. And that's why I use that word, fastidious. So there you go. Bye. Walking behind Liberty Elementary with the pup. Continuing this video log on my dad. Just trying to give some impressions of what I thought about him. Another thing that really stood out, now this didn't last until my later teen years, because something happened in my dad's life, and I'll go into that later, what that may have been. But at one time he was a very hard worker. I think he did definitely come out of that greatest generation, even though he didn't serve in any war. And this may sound weird, but for some reason in my mind, I don't think he could serve because he was left-handed. That can't be right. But for some reason that comes to my mind. But he was still made of that kind of, a little bit of that metal where you worked hard for a living and you did what it took to make something thrive and survive. And he did that with a pet store in Chicago on the corner of 105th and Ewing. It was called the Eastside Water Garden. Now, he didn't start that business. He actually was working for the man that was, I can't remember the address, but it was closer to Calumet Park in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago. There was the Eastside Water Gardens was in a different location at that time, and somebody else ran it, and he learned the business, and he actually got really good at it. And so I was young, baseball, music, you know, I wasn't watching, I wasn't paying attention. That's still a trait of mine today, that it's hard for me to pick up on some things and discern. Started all the way back then. You know, I wasn't picking up on any of this. It was like, maybe it was just typical for a kid that when these changes kind of started to roll in place and decisions were made, and Dad and Mom purchased the pet store because it was a joint effort. They did it together. But when Dad started it, it could have been 72, could have been 71. Can't remember the year. Could have been 70. I'm just guessing now. I'd have to look maybe back at pictures that may pinpoint the year when they did get that pet store and make it their own. I imagine they bought this building, or because we lived in the apartment upstairs, and why I say my dad's a hard worker, or at least he was at this time, is he worked hard to make that business a success. It was just an amazing thing to see nothing turned into something. Now, he bought the business from that other location, and I'm sure a lot of that stuff transferred over, and I don't know how that looked, moving pets, fish and animals into a new location. I don't know how any of that looked, but I do remember my dad spending a lot of hours in this new building with my mother's dad, who we called Judge, and they built these cases, these shelving units, it was the whole middle section of the pet store where all the tanks would be put in, all the fish tanks, and they had to have a place to put all this in, and so they worked hard to put all that in. In addition, I'm sure a lot of other things that needed to be done, but that was pretty impressive. I do remember going down and seeing all that progress, I sure wish I had gotten that from my dad, that kind of the stick-to-itness, the perseverance, maybe even sometimes the patience of doing hard work like that and making something like that happen. Because as I know, just as a side note, he worked on the car and he knew things about mechanical engines and fixing things. You know, he did have some tools and he kept up with that stuff. So, and I wish I'd have picked that up, but I didn't. Anyway, that's what I think about my dad also. He's, you know, just a hardworking guy and able to solve problems and figure things out, because running a business isn't easy. My mom eventually, and we'll go into this more in detail, like I said, it's going to be a long video, she eventually ran the business, and so she's a smart cookie in and of her own self. She knows how to take care of business, and I don't know all the details of that, and I don't want to guess at all that, but my mom was a pretty good glue for that whole business. But in my mind's eye, as I try to figure out and think about my dad specifically, the positive things that I'm thinking about him, that was something I picked up on, that he did that work. There you go. Another thing I think about in regard to maybe even his personality, my dad was a pretty funny guy. Now, he wasn't a jokester or anything like that, but he had a good hearty laugh, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't an irritating laugh or anything like that. It was a good hearty laugh that I do remember, because there's many times that we had laughed as a family. I know what really, and this is another little silly thing, but I do know what really tickled him to no end was just his mischievousness. And I don't know how mischievous he was just overall, but I know, I'll give you an example, okay? My dad, for as long as I can remember, had these teeth that you can kind of disengage. He called them a partial plate. And when he disengaged them, you know, you could take them out and clean them. I guess they're similar to dentures, but it was just a partial thing that fit in his mouth. When he took it out, or when he disengaged it, left it in his mouth, it looked like fangs. I was a big monster movie fan when I was a kid. I watched, back then it was stuff like the Frankenstein, Dracula, the Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon, these kinds of monster movies. And for a little kid, they scared me in their own way. They're nothing like the monster movies today. I don't have any time for putting that kind of stuff in my head, but back then, and one of my favorite movies, this is a side note, is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. That is just a classic movie. Man, I gotta go watch that. I gotta find that somewhere and watch that. It's a great movie. But anyway, my dad would disengage his teeth, and he looked like Dracula, is what he did. And sometimes, you know, it's not like this was staged, because I know my brother and I, we used to do a lot of hide and go seek. We lived above the pet store. There was an apartment up there, and there was plenty of room for all of us. And it was kind of a fun memory of living up there. But Dave and I would hide, as kids do. We did a lot of other stuff. And from time to time, my dad would join in, not in an official capacity, like, oh, let's all go hide and let's go find Dad, even though that may have happened. But I do remember a few times, and it may be more than just a few. He may have gotten a lot of laughter in his own heart for doing this. He would disengage those teeth, and he would put a flashlight on them, and it would glow in this eerie way that only could freak a child out. And he'd not only do that as like we're doing hide and seek or whatever, he'd be in like the coat closet or whatever, and I'd be looking for Dave or whatever, and then bam, there he is. He'd jump out with that flashlight shining on his face and those teeth and disengaged, and it was pretty crazy. and he would just have the best laugh that he had scared the crap out of me, and I'm sure Dave had gotten the same kind of dose as well. So, you know, he was kind of fun-loving. He had a great laugh, a pretty good sense of humor from what I remember, you know. But he wasn't necessarily a jokester in that kind of thing. But there you go, just another story about my dad. Bye.